have to really escalate the noise we make so that we'll be heard.
Well, welcome to Gay USA. That's Ann Northrup. I'm Andy Hum.
And I am Ann Northrup, and we have a lot of news this week, a ton of news, starting with that Pope.
Yes, are you ready for this? He says we need a new balance on gay and women's issues. And while some are saying that this marks a new era for the church, his own bishops remind us that nothing has changed.
Here's the real headline. The Vatican this week defrocked and excommunicated an Australian priest for being too pro-gay and pro-women. Details following.
And he gave a big anti-abortion speech. Also, an LGBT religious coalition is condemning the overbroad religious exemption in the Employment Non-Discrimination Act,
which we talked about last week. And then we get to the really fun stuff, the Metropolitan Opera opening night gala this week, where many of us, including the two of us, demonstrated outside while members of Queer Nation New York went inside with tickets and shouted out just before the start of the opera. Tons of news from Russia and from the Met protest.
This is the reason we are wearing rainbow ribbons.
Yes, picked up at the protest.
The highest-ranking out gay judge was confirmed by the United States Senate.
Although another one's being held up by Marco Rubio. The U.S. Labor Department says all employees with same-sex spouses, no matter where they live, as long as they're legally married, can participate in employee benefit plans.
The leader of South Carolina's fight against same-sex marriage has repented.
And a debate over gay rights in the Italian parliament included a kiss-in by the members of parliament.
Italian style. And I'm going to review an old play by a gay writer that you may not know, but who was Grace Kelly's uncle.
But we start with that crazy...
You may not know who Grace Kelly is. You know, she's been gone a long time, too.
Yes, exactly.
Okay.
We start with the crazy Pope.
Well,
last week, shortly after we taped, this whole thing came out about him making his "we should be nice to the gay people"
Well, he gave
remark.
a very long interview in a Jesuit magazine called America, a very frank interview, or it sounded like that. And among the things that he said were things like this. A person once asked me in a provocative manner if I approved of homosexuality, and I replied with another question. Tell me, when God looks at a gay person, does he endorse the existence of this person with love or reject and condemn this person? We must always consider the person, and things like that. And then he kind of made a lot of broad statements about, you know, we spend too much time on gay marriage and abortion, all this kind of stuff. We've got to look at the core issues about love and all the la la la.
We must stop focusing on small rules. We need women in key roles. We can't interfere with gay people. And then we get to the small print.
Well, the thing is, this has left people around the world, especially, you know, Catholics who are struggling, you know, with how right-wing the church is, in tears. Andrew Sullivan was crying on television over this, that this is the second coming, this is what we've been waiting for. You know, I got to say something, and not to denigrate anybody's feelings, but you shouldn't be waiting for what Daddy says. I mean, in a way, the Pope in his own statements was saying, the source of all truth is among the people, so take advantage of that and be the truth and stop waiting for him, because he announced at the end of this interview, but I subscribe to the Catechism 100%, meaning nothing has changed. Even Bill Donahue, the crazy right-wing guy who runs the Catholic League, said, oh, the liberals are all popping the corks, and the conservatives are in mourning because they think he's gone too far. But they said he's a reformer. He's not a revolutionary. On the other hand, there was this nun who was the head of the nuns group that was being investigated by the Pope, and she said, when you change the atmosphere, you lay the groundwork for real reform. So that's possible.
Well, and I would say even from the outside, the fact that people perceive this as a change gives permission for a different kind of behavior and attitude. But the bottom line here is that nothing has changed.
No doctrine has changed.
And because he got a lot of pushback, presumably from within the church,
which he acknowledged.
He went out the next day and gave this huge anti-abortion speech. Cardinal Dolan of New York went and did a lot of press. He's the head of the U.S. Conference of Catholic Bishops.
And a big blowhard.
Big blowhard, regarded as a jolly old fellow, not so old, and has been extremely anti-gay and very hardline.
Well, now you say that. I confronted him about gay stuff. I mean, belly to belly, one time at the St. Patrick's Day parade, trying to draw him out.
Yeah.
And you couldn't get a vicious statement out of him. On policy, they're fighting gay marriage. They're fighting for this religious liberty thing. They're fighting us on, they're fighting us on these things. But they have
jolly.
They have,
boom.
Exactly. They've learned to moderate their rhetoric on the stuff.
But that, in the end,
that's what the Pope is doing, because he's not changing.
So
he sounds nice.
The question is, to me, once people figure out that doctrine has not changed, that women are not going to be priests, that gay people are still going to be the target of attacks on all these subjects, social services and gay stuff, are they going to reject the church, or are they going to meekly go right back into the pews and say, oh, okay, I hope you change sometime?
As soon as this guy was appointed, I said he could be more dangerous than the last pope, because the last pope was very clear on these things, wasn't he? And a hard ass. And the fact that this is a nice guy will draw people back into a bad system run by men.
Yes.
This Pope made some actually kind of awkward statements about the inclusion of women.
Very.
And not good. And, until he does say we're going to ordain women, forget about it. Our friend Bernard Lynch, the gay Catholic priest who was sort of being run out of the priesthood if they could do it to him, he said, all right, where's our apology?
Yeah.
We want reparations for what you did. You have to apologize for what you did to us, kicking us while we were down during the AIDS crisis. None of that stuff has happened.
Don't hold your breath. So here is what did happen this week, about a week after this interview, and everybody's crying and whatever they did. An Australian priest who has been pro-gay, pro-women in the church, was defrocked and excommunicated by the Pope.
Father Greg Reynolds, and he was the founder of something called Inclusive Catholics. That's the last thing they seem to want.
Yeah.
And then Providence College, right here in Rhode Island, it's a Catholic college. I have a nephew who went there at great expense. They canceled a lecture in support of same-sex marriage by a gay philosophy professor, John Corvino, who's chair of the philosophy department at Wayne State in Detroit. He's spoken at 10 Catholic colleges. But the school says it's okay if an opponent of same-sex marriage gets equal time.
Which has not been required at other places. And in Illinois, as we have seen in other places, a Catholic charity that was getting public funding and acting as an adoption agency lost its public funding when it refused to go along with non-discrimination laws in the state about adoptions. And other groups have come forward, including the Gill Foundation and other foundations, to replace the money that the Catholic charity withdrew from the adoption operation.
Right.
And Cardinal Francis George in Illinois was furious at the idea that they would be required to follow non-discrimination laws. You can't play off the pastoral concern of the church for the poor against the church's teaching. I'm sorry, I've made a mistake here. It wasn't about adoption. This was the same thing that happened in Colorado.
They supported same-sex marriage, or they were in coalitions that supported
They were giving money
marriage.
to immigrant groups.
Right.
That ended up supporting same-sex marriage, and they took that money away because the immigrant groups joined the coalition for same-sex marriage, and these foundations have replaced that money. So Cardinal Francis George says you're playing off this our concern for the poor against our teachings. No, you're the one who's playing
Exactly.
off your support for the poor against your
Which
teachings.
is why a coalition of Catholic groups that support gay rights have come out and said, we can't have this overbroad exemption, in a religious exemption in the Employment Non-Discrimination Act, which is in there now as it's working its way through the United States Senate, because you're throwing those of us who work for religiously affiliated institutions who have
Catholic hospitals.
who have, who may be a doctor or a nurse or the janitor, who are now going to be subject to discrimination if you pass this exemption. They're saying don't do it. I'm saying don't do it too.
Well, I'm saying don't have Catholic organizations running these hospitals and getting all this public funding.
Exactly. If a group gets public money, it has to comply with civil law. Look, there are many Catholic, Jewish, Protestant groups in New York that get a lot of money. Technically, they're supposed to serve everybody equally and abide by the human rights laws. I can guarantee you, if you tested that, you would find out that they don't.
And in Michigan, a committee in the House of Representatives there in the legislature has just passed a proposed law. It hasn't gone to the full House yet or the rest of the legislature, but they have passed a law that says adoption agencies that get public funds are allowed to deny adoptions for religious or moral reasons. This is going backwards.
Did they get this idea from Putin? More on which
Probably.
later.
And in the U.S. House of Representatives, several members there have introduced something they're calling the Marriage and Religious Freedom Act, which would give organizations, private individuals, businesses with just someone who has a particular religious point of view.
Fundamentalist bakers.
Yes, license to discriminate. It gets worse. You work for the IRS and you are a religious person, you can refuse to process tax returns for married same-sex couples or process Social Security benefits. Anywhere you work, any individual could refuse to do anything because of their religious principles, no matter what job they're in, whether it's publicly financed or anything.
Well, Bob Jones University did this years ago. They discriminated. They wouldn't let interracial couples date on campus, and they lost their tax status over this.
Yes.
The law
Yes.
was on our side of
Yep.
justice in those days. And actually, it took a while, but eventually they allowed it.
Well,
many years later.
Here's one reason these things happen. The fundamentalist church in Hawaii, the First Assembly of God, has, they're talking about marriage being legalized there. They're calling a special session of the legislature in October. The First Assembly of God is putting out literature saying that if this is passed, the ACLU will sue to force churches to marry gays, that they will try to force this to happen. This is an utter lie, completely against everything we all stand for.
I have to say, I was on Regis and Kathy Lee many years ago. And
Many years ago.
Yes, it was. And arguing about the gay rights bill with a guy named Noach Deer, who was an Orthodox Jew. And the argument he threw in was, and this is going to force the Catholic Church to ordain homosexual priests. And I was so stunned by the argument, I said, if they didn't ordain homosexual priests, they'd hardly have any. And the audience kind of groaned. And Regis leans over on the air and he says, "Oh, Andrew, you were doing so well." But I was just, Oh, and then, I don't want to get lost in this argument, but the last thing that Noach Deer says to me before the cut to the show's over, he goes, and the next thing they're going to want is rights for pedophilia and bestiality. And then cut, show's over. So I went into the green room and I said, Noach, yelling at him, the only one who's into bestiality is your wife. This was in front of...
That was very clever.
Well, I was pretty upset.
And just as a footnote, because we won't get into all of this right now, but in Russia, one of the biggest propaganda pieces being passed around is this video saying that gay people want to adopt children so they can have sex with them.
That's just unbelievable. Unbelievable.
Now, I have one piece of good religious news, which is that the former San Francisco 49ers quarterback, Steve Young, who was a big hero quarterback and a very straight arrow guy, he and his wife, who has a gay brother, made an appearance at a meeting of gay Mormons. They're Mormon. Affirmation is the gay Mormon group, and they went to support the gay Mormons and say how committed they are to gay rights and how the Mormon Church really has to turn around and be supportive. And it was evidently a very moving moment.
Good. There is progress, but there's not progress at Azusa Pacific University, where a woman named a guy named Heath Adam Ackley, who had taught there as Heather Ann Clements. They're obviously transgender. They're letting him go at the end of the academic year, calling him a distraction. Now, he's a theology professor. The students support him, and he says this year has been a transition from being a mentally ill woman to being a sane transgender man. So, going to try to find a job somewhere else if they can't get it together at Azusa Pacific University in California.
All right. Time to move to Russia?
Yes.
I say that only, metaphorically.
Yes, because I wouldn't.
Well, this just in, before we get to all the fun at the Met Opera, Nikolai Alexeyev, the longtime LGBT activist in Russia, who's been very controversial lately with some looking like he was having a breakdown online.
Anti-Semitic ravings.
Yeah. He applied for a permit to do a demonstration in Sochi against the anti-gay laws. He got rejected on the permit, gathered 9 of his friends. The 10 of them went and did a demonstration anyway. Arrested
in Sochi?
Now.
The Olympics are in February.
Yes. Hauled off to jail, detained for about 4 hours, charged with, acting without a permit and facing big fines. And all this to prove that the Russian government is lying about its commitment to not harassing people.
Well, Putin already said, haven't they already passed a law saying it's going to be a demonstration-free zone?
Exactly, but at the same time assuring the IOC that everybody's going to be fine. And this was sort of going to the belly of the beast and saying, watch out when you come here in February, because they're serious about this no matter what they say to you.
So,
meanwhile,
a very controversial demonstration at the Metropolitan Opera, which is, I've talked to some of my friends about this. People have varying opinions. Well, the whole idea...
Everyone's happy now.
But let's explain.
Sure.
The Metropolitan Opera is having their opening gala. And it's, say the name of the opera, Eugene Onegin?
Onegin.
Onegin, okay.
By Tchaikovsky. So this has been planned, obviously, for several years. The Met decided that this year they were going to open with a big Russian extravaganza. Bad timing, unfortunately. All planned long before any of this came up in Russia with the anti-gay laws.
But the lead singer is Anna Netrebko, who, and the conductor was Valery Gergiev, who are Russian and are friends of Putin.
Particularly Gergiev.
Yes.
Netrebko has been tying herself in knots on her Facebook page, trying to announce her support without going too far and getting herself in trouble.
So the ask by Queer Nation was to Peter Dell.
Actually, the ask, first of all, was by a gay composer, Andrew Rudin, who got really upset at the fact that they were starting the season with this Tchaikovsky opera, dead, oppressed gay composer, while living oppressed gay Russians were getting no support from the cultural world. Right. And they were hiring these Russian stars, soprano and conductor, who were friends of Putin. And the Met was doing nothing and was just going ahead with this big Russian extravaganza. So he wasn't an activist or anything. He was just a regular guy and a composer in the classical music field. Puts up a change.org petition online.
Gets 9,000 signatures asking that they dedicate this performance to Russian gays.
Exactly. And the first mistake the Met made was to say, don't be ridiculous. We are an arts organization. We don't get involved in politics. Well, that's ridiculous. First of all, a great deal of art that is created in the world, whether it's opera or painting or writing or anything, is political.
There were riots at the Rite of Spring or
Exactly.
whatever.
And
It was a long time ago.
we quickly turned up the information that a previous general manager of the Met, Rudolph Bing, not known as a very liberal guy, but he had been, I guess, the victim of anti-Semitism in his past. He refused to let the Met perform in segregated houses in the South and in the 50s, and that got southern cities to change their policies about cultural performances, and that was a big triumph by the Met.
So there was a demonstration outside in which we participated. We have some photos from the demonstration. A beautiful, big, long rainbow banner there by Gilbert Baker, the Betsy Ross of our community who invented the rainbow flag, which says support Russian gays.
If you look closely, you'll see Mr. Hum in the middle there in a pinstripe shirt.
And there's another picture we have of the banner going by the Met. There's Ann Northrop in the middle, and to the left there is Randy Weingarten, the head of the American Federation of Teachers, and on the right, our old friend Shep Wannen, and loyal viewer of GUSA, as he calls our show, Gay USA.
So the curtain time was 6:30. We showed up at about 5. We went through a negotiation with the cops who didn't want to let us on that plaza.
You had Norman Siegel, the former head of the New York Civil Liberties Union, on your side.
Yes, who learned a lesson that night because he thought we had to wait for the cops to give us permission, and we finally got fed up and said, we're just going over there. And we did.
Take your chances.
And the cops let us alone and let us do it. And Norman said afterwards, I learned a lesson tonight. Just take your ground.
Well,
so
doesn't always work out that
so
way. But
all the swells are getting out of the limousines in their fancy dresses and being photographed.
and being handed pink leaflets.
And offered...
Some of whom took some of
yes.
whom took rainbow ribbons.
Patrick Stewart and his wife took
Really?
rainbow ribbons and were interviewed on the red carpet talking about how they were proud to wear the rainbow ribbon, a new symbol we've created. And we had stick-on pink triangles, too, and we were getting a lot of support out there. Now, meanwhile, 4 members of Queer Nation had bought tickets to the opera.
Including my colleague Duncan Osborne at the Gay City News.
And Ken Kidd and Alexis Danzig and Jamie Bauer, and maybe they don't want their names used because their jobs may have
Too late.
changed. But they were up in the family
are.
circle. That's Duncan and Jamie standing up at the back of the family circle at the very top of the Metropolitan Opera.
And this was before the singing started.
Before the introduction. Before the opera, we did not interrupt the opera. Everybody was very concerned about that. Don't interrupt the opera. So they didn't. They just stood up and yelled, Putin, end your attacks on gays. Anna, your silence is killing gays. Valerie, your silence is killing gays. And they managed to yell for about 3 minutes before getting dragged out by the security guards. And because the Met did not want headlines that said Met has protesters arrested, they were simply escorted out of the building and not arrested. Now, the Met was also broadcasting this performance out on the plaza on a big screen, and people were sitting in chairs out in the open air watching it. And as the intro to it, Peter Gelb, the head of the opera, was sitting backstage and was being interviewed, and that was being broadcast outside. So he starts talking about all this and talking about how they support gay people and they're very pro-gay, and he's wearing rainbow suspenders.
And he puts an insert in the program, which is an article that he had in Bloomberg News, explaining their position.
Which is basically, we love gay people, we think the laws are terrible, we're not making a formal dedication because that would be inappropriate and would insult our pro-Putin stars.
And many of our artists come from countries where homosexuality is illegal.
Yes, and then he says, at the end he says, although Russia may officially be in denial about Tchaikovsky's sexuality, because Putin's been saying lately, I don't think he was gay, we're not. We're proud to present Russia's great gay composer. That is a message in itself.
So that was fun. What's next?
A huge, we're going after Coca-Cola. We're going after all the big Olympic sponsors. We're going to continue to go after everyone connected with this and the IOC and everybody. Let me run down some other news. Russia canceled performances by Selena Gomez, the young singer who's Justin Bieber's ex.
What that happened is that, see, they're now nervous about artists coming over because they're nervous that they're going to say something.
Yeah.
Now, Selena Gomez is 21. She ain't taken any position on gay rights, but she couldn't get a visa for her thing. So she has not made any statements, but she's still banned. She had to cancel 2 concerts there.
John McCain, of all people, is now our friend. He writes an op-ed in a Russian online publication that includes they write laws to codify bigotry against people whose sexual orientation they condemn.
Was he talking about the Republican Party?
John McCain, who's been the one person in his family who hates us and votes against every law that would give us any rights.
And he ran on a platform of a constitutional amendment against same-sex marriage. Come on. But there he is. Oh, no, I've seen the right wing do this again and again when it's somebody like on the other side saying these things. Oh, they're anti-gay. Well, so are you.
Yeah. A poll found that 55% of the U.S. population is aware of the anti-LGBT laws in Russia, and over 2/3 of them disapprove of those laws. 13% approve of the laws. You've heard about the proposal by a Russian politician, a member of parliament, to allow kids to be taken away from gay parents.
Horrible.
She's actually the Michelle Bachmann of Russia, although not quite as attractive. Her name is Yelena Mitsulina. So some protesters, some LGBT protesters in Russia put on white medical coats, and they approached her and they offered to take her away to a mental hospital.
Well, you think it's funny, but that's what they used to do to us over there.
She admits the bill won't pass. Well, that's what we thought about the whole first bill, but that did pass.
We told you last week that Cher would not sing at Sochi, and she was on CBS Sunday Morning this past weekend, and she was asked about this, and she says, "You can't cross that line." And he goes, "What line?" "The gay line," she said. This is what she said, "the gay line. My gay following kept me alive in the old days when no one else would come to see me." And he says, "They've always been there?" She says, "Always."
I went to see one of her farewell concerts at Madison Square Garden.
It was all gay.
I know. It was so great. She gave the greatest performance. It was terrific.
But then there's Elton John.
Elton plans to go, although now there's some question about whether he'll be allowed in there.
He says, "I'm not going to go to Russia and tell him, Putin, to go to hell," and things like that. He says he has a wonderful rapport with his Russian audience. And then he says, "Maybe I can talk to some people in the administration." But then there's this parents committee in Russia that has asked Putin to ban Elton John because it would just having him on the stage would be a violation of the homosexual propaganda law.
Yes, it would.
That's what they're saying.
He wants to tell the administration that they're being silly. They're harming their reputation in the rest of the world. I'm sure that will make them go, "Oh, okay."
Ian McKellen spoke out about it this week, too.
And Stephen Fry spoke out about it. He went to St. Petersburg, where they're having a Queer Fest festival.
The 5th annual Queer Pride Fest.
Yeah.
They get 150 people there. The author of the anti-gay law, well, actually, he's
the
not
St. Petersburg anti-gay law.
Yes, Vitaly Milanov
Yep.
tried to foil this gathering. He came with 6 goons to verbally insult the participants, calling them un-Russian, faggots, and animals.
Slapping a few of them.
Yes, they attacked some of them. There were no major injuries. So the police were called and challenged the organizers of the Queer Fest, but they backed down because there was no violation, and it's supposed to go on for 9 days. But Stephen Fry was there, and he made a statement that we have on videotape that we're going to show you for the next 3 minutes, I think it is.
Hello, I'm Stephen Fry. I'm sitting here in the offices of Vcht in St. Petersburg. I came here on a journey to find out just exactly what this new homophobic law was about. And although I've been horrified and upset and angry at the brutish tyranny of so many of the homophobic people who are supported by the local government and indeed the federal government. What has touched me much more has been the work of the activists of Vught and the people who stand up to bullying, stand up to homophobia, stand up to name-calling, stand up to violence. And they do so because they are proud of who they are, and they know they have the dignity and all the rights that any human being should have. And in time, Russia will know that too. But I'm very worried that between then and now, many bones will be broken on the streets and sidewalks and pavements of the cities and towns of Russia, and many innocent young people will have miserable lives. Some will end in suicide. The figures of suicide for gay teenagers are higher here than anywhere else. And it's a very serious problem. But I'm filled with hope simply because of the quality of the volunteers and activists who work for Vught, who devote themselves to making sure that young people do not feel alone and isolated and unhappy and freakish. And it's a marvelous thing that they're doing. I'm thrilled that there's a queer festival here because they can start with, as they did in Brazil, in Rio and in Sao Paulo. Sao Paulo's first gay parade had 300 people in. I went to it last year. It had 3.5 million people on the streets. That's not impossible here, because a lot of the supporters are straight people, and straight people who have open minds, who think freely, who want the best for all mankind, are the best friends that gay people could ever have. So I would urge you, whether you are straight or gay, to try and get involved with an organisation like Vught, to support them, and to use your voice quietly, moderately, reasonably, but persistently against the terrible tide of nationalism, religious zealotry, and hatred that is threatening to turn this glorious Mother Russia into a fascist state. Meanwhile, all my love and all my support. There's a word children used to say in England which was wicked, which meant something was really good. And Vught is wicked. Thank you. Spasibo.
And you're wicked too, Stephen Fry. You're terrific. My hero, and you can see him on a stage in New York. He's playing Malvolio in Twelfth Night this season. I saw it in London. He's fantastic, really fantastic in it as Malvolio.
Just a couple more notes on the Russia story. Oleg Dusiev, a news anchor on Culture TV, was fired after he came out on August 30th. He is devoted Christian. He's a famous pianist, but he was fired. He said he's not worried about his career, but that thugs kill and maim Russian gays and lesbians. Silence in such a situation is impossible. Pretty brave in Russia.
Again, they accusing us, of course, under this law of propaganda, but Anne made reference to that propaganda film. It goes on for 4 minutes with every shibboleth against gays you have ever heard in your life.
Horrible.
Absolutely vicious.
Disgusting.
Everything you've ever, and it uses the Regeneris study that was done on gay families.
Regnerus.
Regnerus, is that how you say it?
Meanwhile, Putin is saying, we are not exercising any infringement on the rights of sexual minorities.
Well, actually, here's the full quote. Any minority's right to be different must be respected, but the right of the majority must not be questioned. I mean, come on. That's the difference between our countries, it seems like.
Exactly.
And a lot of countries that don't respect minority rights.
We noticed in the midst of this something that happens periodically. We've heard about a U.S. PR firm, Ketchum, being hired by Russia to write Putin's op-ed piece in the New York Times. Well, here's a whole 8-page full-color insert that Russia put in the New York Times. That they do periodically.
Yes,
now, this cost hundreds of thousands of dollars, and this particular edition has a whole gay story in it about how nice they are to gay people and how easy it is to be gay in Russia.
Unbelievable. Well, don't tell that to, well, it's not gay specific, but it's related to us. It's the Pussy Riot arrests, and one of the women there is one of the jailed is on a hunger strike now because she's being treated so badly.
Yeah, in a terrible prison.
2-year sentence.
Lesbian Canadian speed skater has come out and talked about how she's going to be out in Sochi. Ditto, an Australian lesbian snowboarder. The IOC's, one of the IOC board members is Anita DeFrance. She's been a board member for a long time with the IOC, and she was interviewed this week. I saw her. I hadn't seen on MSNBC, I think. And she was asked about all this, and she said, oh, you know, the IOC, we love the gay people, everything's fine. And she was on with someone who said, well, what about the Pride House? You know, the Russians banned the Pride House. You've had a Pride House for several Olympics now. And
A place for LGBT people and their friends to gather.
there are a lot of athletes who've said that going to the Pride House at the Olympics helped them come out and feel more comfortable
Help
about
them win.
themselves. That too. So Anita DeFrance, when asked, you know, will you, since Russia has banned this, will you go ahead and make a Pride House in Sochi? And she says, oh, I don't think we should segregate people.
Oh, and no more men's and women's competitions anymore.
Yeah.
That's segregation.
And we have ongoing vodka protests. The Mr. Stoli contest.
Mr. Stoli guy.
Wrapped up with its finals in New York, about 3 blocks from us last week, and ACT UP and Queer Nation were there to again disrupt the competition, much to the horror of the gay men there to look at the Mr. Stoli guy
They
contestants.
don't like it any more than some opera goers. By the way, the
opera goers applauded.
That's right. Well, there was a couple of boos, and then there was hearty applause from some quarters for the people at the
Well,
opera.
because probably half the audience was gay.
Or Patrick Stewart.
And the ACT UP Oral History Project is taking the United in Anger ACT UP film to Moscow to a film festival.
Nice
Are we
knowing them.
okay with
Nice.
that?
Good luck. Good luck.
I
Well,
don't know.
yeah. You know.
The Moscow International Festival of Activist Art.
Okay.
All
Shall we
right.
move on?
Let's do other stuff.
Well, all right. We this week, the Senate, by a 98-0 vote, confirmed the first out gay federal appeals court judge. We have a picture of him. He's Todd Hughes. He will be a circuit judge for the U.S. Court of Appeals for the Federal Circuit, and therefore he will be the highest-ranking gay judge, Todd Hughes. Did we find his? Is he there and gone? There he is.
There he is.
Mr.
He's
Hughes.
currently the deputy director of the Civil Division at the Department of Justice. The Senate also confirmed Elaine Kaplan, who's the acting director of the Office of Personnel Management.
But she didn't get as good a vote.
64 to 35 to the U.S. Court of Federal Claims.
And then there's a judge who is essentially being stopped. His name is Judge William Thomas, who was nominated to the Federal District Court in Miami. And you're sponsored by your senators from your state, and the Democratic senator is fine with it. But Marco Rubio has found reasons to oppose him now. He's an out gay guy.
He doesn't like the results in a couple of cases, even though the prosecutors in the cases have said, no, that was the right decision.
He's just looking for an excuse, and he'll be a very bad president if he's ever elected.
Yeah, watch out for him. All right. There are a couple of stories of transgender teens that are interesting. First of all, Casey Karen?
Yeah.
Yes, transgender male at Richmond High School in Johnstown, Pennsylvania, was told he could not run for homecoming king,
But they left him on the ballot for homecoming queen.
which did not make him happy.
Now, he has a man's driver's license, but he has not had gender reassignment surgery.
He's 17.
All right, I'm just saying, and they're saying Pennsylvania law requires that to change your birth certificate. His mom, Kathy Karen, says she loves her son. She also wants...
He has 2 moms.
Yep. Casey also wants to wear a boy's cap at graduation. Can everybody? That's Casey in the
middle.
In the middle there. Can't everybody wear the same color cap to graduation? And also wants gender identity added to the anti-bullying policy and to get a GSA at the school.
And is getting a lot of support from schoolmates. Meanwhile, Cassidy Lynn Campbell, transgender girl at Marion High School in Huntington Beach, California, was chosen as homecoming queen, which sounded like a great story.
And she was happy.
Yeah, until the next day when she started reading what people were saying on her Facebook account.
Vicious, horrible stuff.
Oh, unrelenting, vicious, brutal attacks.
So she posted this very tearful lament online, but
Yeah.
it's just horrendous. So, I mean, we certainly have a long way to go, and October is National Bullying Prevention Month, if you didn't know. And then there is the story out of Florida where the ACLU is suing Pinellas Technical Education Center, and we have a picture of Alex Wilson here for denying she is a trans nursing student. They're denying her bathroom rights. So ACLU is citing Title IX of the Civil Rights Act. She can't use bathrooms used by other women, which she had been using until the administration realized that she's transgendered, then required now to use a single occupancy toilet in a storage area, threatened with criminal charges if she uses a women's room.
Why not a bucket in a broom
which
closet?
would make her ineligible to graduate if she gets arrested.
Also, the National Organization for Marriage, quickly running out of things to do and money to do it.
This is the anti-gay group.
Yeah, well, National Organization for Marriage,
Well,
yes.
we're for marriage, aren't we? Maybe not.
Some days. They have a new crusade. They are joining the fight to repeal the California law that gives rights to transgender students because they think it will wipe out gender roles. I remember when we used to go.
As I'm calling for in the Olympics.
When we used to go into schools to do education on homosexuality,
Yes.
I remember a kid in one school saying to me, if you have two women in the relationship, how do you know who's in charge?
Speaking
Both of us.
California passed another bill. I don't know, this will probably get the right wing upset too. Well, it's to voluntarily put questions about sexual orientation and gender identity on applications that people fill out for Medi-Cal and Obamacare. It's designed to help address the inequalities in healthcare for the LGBT community so that we can be better targeted for interventions. Well, for those of you who live in
Lest
California.
you think everything's up to date in California, in Porterville, California, where the city council was the only government in California to support Proposition 8, the mayor and vice mayor have been fired for supporting LGBT Pride Month.
All right, a little political news. In Seattle, the out-gay mayoral candidate, Ed Murray, is leading in the polls 52-30 over his rival,
incumbent?
and now has the majority support of the council.
Yeah. In Vico, Kentucky, V-I-C-C-O, I assume that's the right pronunciation. You'll correct me if it's not. We've told you about how they were the smallest town in Kentucky and maybe anywhere to have a gay mayor.
Johnny Cummings.
The local hairdresser.
Yes.
In very rural Kentucky. Well, it turns out the town is thriving under his leadership.
And the fact that he's not just openly gay, but he passed a LGBT rights law in the town.
Exactly. And because of the publicity they're getting.
Especially on the Colbert Report.
They've gotten a lot of grants and
$200,000.
donations, and they're doing a lot of improvement of the town.
Johnny says, I thought the 15 minutes of fame would have been over a long time ago, but it ain't.
In Provo,
He didn't say it ain't, I just said that.
Provo, Utah, they had their first Pride celebration.
Congratulations.
And in upstate New York, or a little upstate in the Hudson Valley, Sean Eldridge has declared his candidacy for Congress. Now, he's a fairly well-known gay man.
He was the political director of Freedom to Marry.
Yes, and his husband, Chris Hughes, was the co-founder of Facebook.
And he is rich.
And the owner of the New Republic. So some people call them carpetbaggers, but they have worked very, very hard to support local businesses in the Hudson Valley community, and that's what his whole TV commercial is about.
I was a political consultant at one time, and I might want to give him some advice. He doesn't include his husband or his work in Freedom to Marry in his bio. Or the ad that he did, this long ad about who he is. And, I think you got to dance.
At least put it in the bio.
You dance with the one that brung you. This is his strength. This is his accomplishment. Own it, and so you don't seem embarrassed about it.
Right.
Now that they do, he does put it in his issues section.
Oh, okay.
And then, yeah, okay.
The White House had a roundtable on bisexuality, not open to the press or the public. And it was interesting the way the bisexual community talked about this leading up to it. There has not been any report that I've seen about what happened in this discussion. But they went there to raise their particular concerns. And some people will say, well, bisexuality, why is that a particular concern? You're really discriminated against for the gay part of you, and isn't that enough? And the
many bisexuals will argue they're discriminated against by both the straight and gay community.
Exactly, and that they are subject to really a higher level of anger and violence in their relationships and outside from people who are
biphobic.
Yes.
Fewer people identify in these polls as bisexual than identify as lesbian or gay. Now, many more of us are bisexual in that sense, but it is something very hard for people to own because of the
discrimination and stigmatization. Yes. Do we think it's real that several of the out gay members of the New York City Council are in the running to be the next speaker? Rosie Mendez, Jimmy Van Bramer.
I just hope we have a small d Democratic council, because it's generally run like a dictatorship, and I don't think it should be.
We've lost some activists in the last week who we want to mention.
Yes, in D.C. we have a picture of him. Barrett Brick, an old friend of mine in his New York days, but he's my age, 59. More than 35 years of activism. Died of cancer. He was an attorney at the FCC, but he was a former president of the D.C. Gay and Lesbian Activists Alliance, an executive director of the World Congress of Gay and Lesbian Jewish Organizations, co-chair of the American Bar Association's Committee on Sexual Orientation and Gender Identity. Rick Rosendahl down there in Washington said, in a town swarming with partisan hackery, Barrett stood up for principle and put the greater good before self-interest. He was a good guy. He got Elie Wiesel on board in terms of getting gays in the Holocaust Museum. So that was a good thing.
Died of cancer at 59.
Survived by his partner, Antonio Ruffini.
Gloria Johnson, San Diego activist, 76 years old.
Yep. Social worker, first in the county to work with people with HIV. Past president of San Diego Democrats for Equality and a founding member of the Lesbian Rights Task Force in the 80s, and a former chapter president of the National Organization for Women.
And I want to congratulate the organization Caribbean LGBT.
Oh,
they
yes.
marched in the West Indian Day Parade in Brooklyn, New York, which is a Labor Day event, which is is that the biggest parade in New York?
I think it's the biggest parade in New York. It's unbelievably large.
Also controversial for some of the violence that goes on around
Sometimes. Gets a little, feisty.
It does. But this was an out gay group that marched in the parade, and if you want information about them, islandlgbt.com is where you can find that.
They chanted, "End homophobia now." And it does look like we're going to get this guy, Bill de Blasio, as mayor of New York.
I hope so.
The leading candidate. The story this week was that he had worked with the Sandinistas in Nicaragua, and like he's a commie or something. Well, he has socialist sympathies, and I hope he does. We want him to have sympathies with...
we actually thought he was too middle of the road.
Yes.
Maybe we're wrong. I was wrong about something last week. Just a quick apology. We were talking about a murder by a guy who killed a guy while saying, stabbed him to death in the street while saying that he'd been making eyes at him or
blowing kisses.
Blowing kisses.
Which was this guy's MO. He saw people blowing kisses at him.
And he was charged with a hate crime, an anti-gay hate crime. And I was trying to make the point that this was not about a deliberate decision to go after someone gay, that this was...
an insane person.
An insane person. But I was saying, come on, he's crazy, he's nuts.
Right.
And a viewer pointed out that this was not the right way to talk about someone who...
is mentally ill.
Exactly. Thank you.
We do.
And I apologize for that. You're right.
I have to watch out. I do that myself sometimes.
Okay, marriage news.
All right.
And they also said I was too mean to the Home Depot couple who were, did the public flash mob proposal in Home Depot
Salt
in
Lake
Salt
City.
Lake. Yeah.
10 million people watch that thing, and we're charmed by it.
Well, then I'm getting too cynical, but I apologize for being too cynical, but I don't apologize for criticizing the dancing of the flash mob. They're not very good.
They're not professionals.
Well, no,
And
but
that's part of the
even
charm.
non-professionals sometimes manage to have a little more rhythm.
Okay.
All right, marriage news.
All right.
The Labor Department, the U.S. Labor Department, announced that because of the striking down of Section 3 of DOMA, the ERISA law, which has been a federal law covering insurance of private employers,
How you can deduct it. In other words, we haven't been able to, the reason we've always had to pay taxes on this is because we're not covered under the federal ERISA laws, under their definition of
and
family.
companies have said for years, we can't cover you because of ERISA. Well, now the whole thing is flipped 180 degrees.
And we're not going to cover straight people anymore. No.
Well, more about that later, but the U.S. Labor Department has said that ERISA will now recognize legally married same-sex couples wherever they lived as long as they were legally married somewhere. Private employee pension plans and related benefit plans will be covered.
Do you think we'd be getting this under President Romney?
I do not.
Okay. But Freedom to Work, which is the pro-gay group trying to work for ENDA, is urging Secretary Perez to rewrite the Family Medical Leave Act regulations to adopt the same kind of recognition.
I think all this is going to fall into place bit by bit. And the
Only
House...
if we push.
Of course. The House and Senate are reintroducing the Domestic Partner Benefits and Obligations Act for federal employees not living in marriage states. In case they can't or won't go to a marriage state to get married, they still want them to be eligible for federal benefits. And the Berkeley City Council is going to vote on closing their domestic partner registry. Those organizations that have negotiated domestic partner benefits will keep those, but they're closing the domestic partner
I have a
registry.
concern
I can't
about that.
imagine you'd like that.
I read about it. I was encouraged that they're still going to keep the benefits.
Yeah.
But they're closing the registration bureau.
And both Tennessee and Louisiana have announced, and this is the other side of the 180-degree turn, that they will not recognize same-sex married couples. They will not accept tax returns based on a federal form that is filed by a married same-sex couple. We've explained this to you before. They will not allow people to change their names on their driver's licenses just because they're a married same-sex couple married elsewhere.
It's outrageous.
Well, this is how it's going to continue
In
to
New
play
Jersey, legislation is inching toward the override of Chris Christie's veto of the marriage bill. 12 more are needed in the Assembly, 3 in the Senate. The session ends in January, and then the court case may intervene.
Anytime in there. In Illinois, they're working towards a legislative discussion of marriage again. There will be a march on Springfield, Illinois, October 22nd. You can go to marchonspringfield.org for information about that.
In New Mexico, the ACLU and the National Center for Lesbian Rights have filed briefs with the New Mexico Supreme Court seeking the freedom of 6 couples to marry under the New Mexico Constitution. That suit was filed in March.
Yeah, this is just the latest part of it. In South Carolina, a former state senator, John Hawkins, a Republican, who sponsored the 2005 constitutional amendment in the state,
And got 78% of the vote for it.
now says, I was wrong. Now, I sponsored that constitutional amendment not for religious or moral reasons, but because of a sense of duty to the law. What the hell
You're
does
writing
that
the
mean?
law. You wrote a law.
What law? And as state representative in Ohio, a Republican wants, the great judge who ordered.
He's been giving out marriage license to the most needy gay couples. No, I'm not exaggerating.
Which is going to get him in
People
trouble.
who are going to
but
die
now-
or who have died.
Yeah, the state senator wants, or representative wants him impeached.
Impeached. And in Indiana, 2/3 poll said that amending the state's constitution is not the right way to deal with same-sex marriage. But when they asked it another way, only 46% oppose the amendment, and 43% support it. 3/4 support some legal recognition for gay couples. The amendment would strip all
We have
rights
4 minutes.
from unmarried couples. It could go to the voters in 2014.
Okay.
All right.
In China, LGBT groups have been asked to cancel displays and brochures at a China charity affair.
In Italy, we have a picture of this. Politicians from the Five Star Movement started a kissing in Parliament during the debate on anti-homophobia bill, which was passed by the lower house.
These are members of Parliament engaging in same-sex kisses in Italy.
Don't worry, Archbishop Dolan. Berlusconi's party says it will fall in the Senate. In Peru, Congressman Carlos Bruce, we have a picture of him, introed a civil unions bill. He's a very popular political figure, but he's getting heavy attacks from the church, who said he introduced the bill to justify his sexual orientation. Well, all he will say is, I will not answer such vileness. That's not vile.
It's not vile to call you gay.
Right. Well, you know, it's slander in some parts of the world.
I guess so.
You wouldn't want to be
still.
called that in Russia.
In Britain, a transsexual couple has married.
They're both transsexual. There they are. And it's the first time
So it's
that's
a
ever
straight
happened.
marriage.
Yes, it is.
Okay.
And in Finland, they're going to get the same-sex marriage bill going there because of a petition by the people. AIDS news.
In Pea Ridge, Arkansas, the schools have agreed to readmit the 3 foster kids whose mother is HIV positive. The school superintendent will only say the issue has been resolved, not whether the kids were actually forced into HIV testing.
And the deputy executive director of UNAIDS says we can end the epidemic by 2030 at the rate we're going. Not eradicate it, but get it under epidemic levels. We have to keep doing our work.
Oh, boy.
Well,
Under epidemic levels.
We thought it might never end.
Wow. All right, entertainment news. Well, the Emmys were semi-gay, probably mostly because of Behind the Candelabra, the Liberace film on HBO, which walked off with tons of awards, but most particularly Michael Douglas getting up to accept his Best Actor in a miniseries or movie award and saying, half of this belongs to Matt Damon. What do you want, the top or the bottom?
And he said this was a two-hander.
Yeah.
There was a lot of innuendo there.
A lot.
Oh, he kind of,
Yeah.
not so.
The other big gay winner was Modern Family, which has won for several years now as Best Comedy, and Jim Parsons, out gay actor for The Big Bang Theory. That was about it on the... Oh, and Neil Patrick Harris hosting, but people thought it was kind of boring, I guess. I only saw the last 45 minutes.
Transamerica is a new docu-soap reality TV series about trans folks, and it's casting in L.A. Go to transamericacasting.com to find out.
Elton John, by the way, did a tribute to Liberace on the Emmys, and everybody
Yes.
said, what the heck was that about?
And they're shooting a new series in San Francisco on gay men called Looking, starring Jonathan Groff and Russell Tovey, 2 out gay actors, directed by Andrew Hay, who did the great movie Weekend, a British movie.
Next Tuesday, 7 o'clock, New York Public Library, panel discussion on the big AIDS activism exhibit they're opening. A couple of days later, Why We Fight, panel discussion, me, Sarah Schulman, Avram Finkelstein, Edmund White, what the heck is he doing on there, and Richard Berkowitz. And the next night, Tuesday, at the CUNY Grad Center, 7 o'clock panel on gay media. Me,
Center for Lesbian and Gay Studies there.
Mike Signorelli, Andres Duke, and David Badash.
Sounds good. I want to recommend a play called Philip Goes Forth at the Mint Theater. This is the theater that revives these things from, 80 to 100 years ago. This is by George, well, that's the scene from the show. That's a picture of George Kelly. He wrote it. He was gay. He had a partner for 55 years. He's Grace Kelly's uncle, and he'd only died in 1974. They didn't invite the lover to the funeral when he died. He had to slip in the back.
But she did movies with Cary Grant.
Oh well, yes. Anyway, the play itself is a wonderful piece about a young man who breaks away from his father.
Philip
and
goes
business.
forth.
Philip
We're
goes
going forth. We'll see you next week.
Bye-bye.